Friends, I'm delighted to be with you and grateful for the invitation of the president to have a conversation with you. I really do hope it's a conversation that you and I have a chance for talk about 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so. I'm talking about 21st Century Reformation. I don't choose those words lightly. I do bring you greetings from Columbia Seminary, and I am attentive because the chair of our board, Bill Shy, is sitting right there. And while the Reverend Peary is right that I do have tenure, and indeed am an endowed chair, I'm not stupid because the chair of the board is sitting right there. But I bring you greetings also from Steve Hayner, the Reverend Dr. Steve Hayner, who's the 9th president of Columbia Seminary. It's an honor to be with you and a delight. So I do want to have a conversation with you. Some of you have heard me talk about these kind of things before. I pay a lot of attention to trends. I think trends are worthy of our attention more than fads. Fads are interesting, but I think trends are worthy of our attention. I'm interested because there's a book that some of you have read by a woman named Phyllis Tickle, who's not a theologian. She's not even a sociologist. She's very clear. She's been on the stage here in Montreat. Phyllis Tickle wrote a book called The Great Emergence, and her thesis is every 500 years or so, Christ's church goes through a rummage sale. That's her thesis. Every 500 years or so, Christ's church seems to go through a rummage sale. And so she's looked at Christendom since the time of Christ, and she seems to identify every 500 years or so, a rummage sale period happens. What happens in a rummage sale? Yeah, you get rid of stuff. You decide what's worthy of keeping and what you want to get rid of, right? If it's a church rummage sale, what you end up doing, of course, everyone brings their stuff and everyone trades stuff and then takes it back home. Phyllis Tickle is saying that's not so much what she thinks is happening, but she's arguing that every 500 years or so, the church goes through a rummage sale. And when she looks at the seasons of Christendom, she says, so the academic term, right, is not AD, but Common Era. And this is not a denial of Christ, because even in the Common Era, CE, we still talk about dating from the time of Christ, the birth of Christ, right? So she says about 590 in the Common Era, we end up with a person named Gregory the Great. Saint Gregory the Great, Pope Gregory the Great. In 590 in the Common Era, what happens about 590? Those of you who are my historians, come on, think about Christendom, think about the world, think about Europe. 590 in the Common Era, what? Let's say again? Nice. Oh, that's well done. So we have this emergence of Islam taking place. Interestingly enough, Muslim scholars and Jewish scholars are also looking at Tickle's thesis, and they're tracking similar patterns, which is quite fascinating. Okay? Think about 590 in the Common Era in terms of Europe, in terms of the Christian church. Rome, what? Yeah, Rome has fallen. Rome has collapsed, not over the course of a day, actually the course of several years. These Visigoths from the north, persons who dress in black and have black eyeliner, etc., they've come and they have taken over Rome. Okay, so the Visigoths sacked Rome. Europe is on the verge of what they call the Dark Ages, Middle Ages, right? And so Christendom is at risk because, at least in terms of the Roman center of Christendom, it's at risk. Gregory the Great is credited with saving Christianity because he moves the great Christian documents, etc., into two places. He moves them into convents and to monasteries and begins the great libraries of Europe as a result. About 500 years later, the Great Schism takes place. Schism between whom? Nice, East and West. Eastern Church called the Orthodox Church. Western Church called the Roman Catholic Church. On the left right there, right, if you can't see him, this is Pope Francis. On the right, on the second day of his papacy, the Pope invited the Patriarch, his equivalent, the Patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church, to meet him in Rome. It's the first time that the Pope that early on has invited a Patriarch from another religious faith tradition, still Christian, but a different tradition called Orthodox, to meet him in Rome. This Francis guy is weird. We have to watch him. Great Schism happens. Suddenly, Christianity is split. I realize the Oriental churches already left earlier. The Syrians, the Antiochians, etc., the Coptics had left earlier. But this is the great Eastern-West Schism. 500 years later, what happens? Yeah, we call this the Reformation, from which you and I, those of us who in the room are Presbyterian-flavored Christians, that's where we come from, right? There's a guy who's not very attractive, actually probably not even this thin. He's apparently short, squat, nails a bunch of ideas to a door in Wittenberg, Germany. Scholars are actually doubting that actually happened, but they think it's a nice idea. But anyway, he had some ideas about the church, Roman Catholic Church, and how the church is supposed to change. The Reformation period begins. Same period, equally unattractive man seems to be a theme here, but he's tall and thin, named Zwingli, in a place called Zurich in Switzerland. He's preaching the same kinds of things. And from the Swiss stream comes us, Presbyterians, the Reformed. Otherwise, if we came from the German stream, we'd all be called Lutherans, and we'd all be cold and northern people and eating fish preserved in lye, etc. So, thanks be to God, by the providence of God. Anyway, sorry. So, Protestant Reformation happens. Guess what? 500 years later? Ta-da! 500 years later, Tickle says, we're in a rummage sale. She says the rummage sale periods are always really, really tough times for the church because people are walking around in the church and they're asking a key question, will the church survive? Yeah, will the church survive? She says in each period of these major rummage sale periods, people aren't walking around saying, cool, this is the Reformation, this is so great. They're walking around going, ah! Oh no, what's happening? How will the church survive? Will there be a church, etc.? Tickle is very clear. She says what's interesting is after every rummage sale period, the church emerges what? Yes, the church always emerges stronger and more faithful. Different, but the church always emerges as stronger, more faithful. So I'm arguing that I think we are in a 21st century Reformation. Church historians, who are not always the most fun people to be with at parties. Church historians, I know a number of them. One of them lives here called Erskine Clark, who scares me. Dr. Clark is one of my great friends, and I love him. Dr. Clark and I were in Mexico together. I know. Dr. Clark and I were in Mexico. I love telling this story. We were in Mexico together, and we were in a Pentecostal church. And the preacher was inviting us to raise our hands up to the Lord. And so I, of course, and we were there with students from Columbia, and their hands were up, and my hand was up, and I was praising the Lord, and I looked over, and Dr. Clark. And I said, Erskine, the preacher is inviting us to raise our hands up to the Lord. And Dr. Clark said, Rodger, I am a lifelong Presbyterian from South Carolina. This is as high as my hands will go. Anyway, these church historians, whom I adore and truly love, are reminding us over and over again that, the phrase is, this is not new. You may think this is new because it's always all about you, but this is not new. The truth is, God is always faithful. Amen? Amen. God always is. But sometimes we have to go through a rummage sale period to try to figure out what we're supposed to be doing. What's worth keeping, what's not. So I think we're in a Reformation period. And these church historians, they're saying, will eventually look back on this period and call it something. And those of you who are young people on planning teams, you get to say in the years to come, I was alive during the whatever. When you're in a rocker in front of Assembly Inn. And you'll have young people gathered around you saying, wow, you were alive during yeah, I was. It was hard, I'll tell you, it was hard. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm amazing, yeah. The challenge for you and for me is to see our way through, by the grace of God, these Reformation periods, right? I think we're in the 21st century Reformation. So I want to finish up and talk about 8 trends that I think are worthy of our attention. Fads are fun, but they're not worthy of our attention. So I collect these. I discarded one recently and added one in. I think there's a trend. This is not either or. I think it's a shift. I think it's a movement of weight. I think we're moving in education, Christian education, which is what I teach, from tribal education to immigrant education. I think the church has spent much of our life educating the tribe, and what I think is right now we have to be more attentive educating immigrants. Immigrants not necessarily meaning people who come from other lands, although it includes them. I think immigrants are including especially persons who are coming to us and do not know us, and do not know our traditions, do not know our language. So for each of these 8 trends, I have an image, and the image right here is Gloria Patri, is the first line of Gloria Patri. Some of you sing that. If you sing that, do you sing that in your congregations? Do you, any of you? Okay, yeah. So I was in a focus group with a bunch of young adults in Silicon Valley in San Jose, California, and a young man came up afterwards and he said, hey, so I appreciate you're asking us questions and doing your research on young adults, but I just have a question. I went to a Presbyterian church and to a Methodist church, and I'm not sure how this happens, but this lady's name was in both their bulletins, but she never stood up. And one was Presbyterian and one was Methodist, and so I don't know how she gets around. And I had no idea what he was talking about. Her name? Gloria Patri. And I said, when that lady's name appears in the bulletin, does the congregation stand up and do something like singing, glory be to the Father? And they both sang that. And I said, yeah, cool. Well, Gloria Patri actually is Latin for the first line, glory be to the Father. He goes, oh, cool. And he walked away. I found out later that he works for Google. I was like, dude, you couldn't have Googled that? Hello. But I thought to myself, how is a 20-something software engineer supposed to know that Gloria Patri is Latin for glory be to the Father unless we teach him, unless we tell him? 60%, latest word I got from Louisville, which is where the national church offices are for the Presbyterian Church USA, 60% of the people in our pews, chairs, who are members were not born and raised Presbyterians. 60% not born and raised Presbyterian. 15% have no church history whatsoever. So anytime I get up and I say, oh, friends, this is such a familiar story. We've all heard this story in the Bible so many times. Anytime I get up and say, this is such a familiar hymn, what have I just said to the 15%? Oh, did you think you were welcome here? No, this is just for tribal members for whom this story really is familiar. No, this is not for you. So friends, the Lord be with you. Lift up your hearts. Let us give thanks to the Lord our God. Right? And so what's cool is some folks right around here are like, what? That's not on screen. Where did they get that? Right? Okay. I think we have to be serious about immigrant education. Second, it's very clear in the research with young adults, especially 20, 30-somethings, most of whom are not with us, but were baptized and confirmed by us, a number of whom said they had a great time coming to a Montreat youth conference. But now they're in their 20s and 30s. They're not in churches anymore, our churches anymore, any church anymore. I was in a focus group in Arlington, Texas, and I asked about mission, and one young woman said, the problem with you people, is that you seem to have no effect on the place in which God has planted you. For her, an assessment of authenticity was what effect do you have on the neighborhood in which God has planted you? She said, we've got this church across the street from my condo complex. We could open up our blinds and people would just say, cool, more parking, if it disappeared. Nobody in our neighborhood would say, oh no, what happened to that church? How will we be a neighborhood without that church? She said they have no impact on us whatsoever. They seem to come in, they drive in on Sundays and do their stuff, and then they drive back out. She said, wouldn't it be nice if they actually made a difference here in the neighborhood? Not that mission is not out there only, but mission also is right here. So the stated clerk, who is one of our highest elected officers of the Presbyterian Church USA, is the Reverend Dr. Grady Parsons, amazing, faithful man. Grady told me this story. He said this is 2013. Yeah, so 9 years ago, the Presbyterian Church in the Republic of Korea, a church, by the way, which we started. Thank you very much. We brought Jesus to Korea because surely until we did that, Jesus was not there. So The Presbyterian Church in the Republic of Korea the General Assembly voted to staff and educate and send 11 missionaries. Where? Here. And Grady got this telex and had it translated, and he thought it was a mistranslation. Dr. Parsons said, I think this is a mistranslation. They're surely asking for more missionaries because we started these people. We're the mother church. So he sent a telex back to his counterpart, the stated clerk from the Presbyterian Church Republic of Korea, and he sent a back note and said, Dr. Parsons, the original translation is correct. We are sending 11 missionaries to you. And Grady said, wait a minute, we're the mother church. Why are you sending missionaries to us? And the clerk of the Presbyterian Church Republic of Korea said, because we've been praying for the mother church for years, and we think that the Spirit somehow needs to be revived in the mother church. And Dr. Parsons said, it was so cool. In one moment, we did a 180 from being the people who do mission to those poor people over there to being the people who receive mission, to being the objects of mission. He said it was a new posture for us all to remind us that this is a mission field. Perhaps many are saying the most potent mission field. Mission not just out there, mission also right here. I think there's a movement from reasoned spirituality to mystery-filled spirituality. So this is a picture of Orthodox Church that's not too far away from where Lyle and I and, Ridgely and others go to school, built nearby. This is St. Elias, and this is the sanctuary there. There's a hiccup right now. The Orthodox churches in the United States are picking up a significant number of young adults, many of whom come from more evangelical backgrounds. And it's intriguing. And I go there on a regular basis and worship. And when I was there last time, the archpriest came over and he said, Professor, I just want to say to you that a number of young people from your campus are coming and they're worshiping on a regular basis. And I said, oh, good. And he said, now they're not joining, which makes us sad because we want them to discover the one true Church of Christ. But still, they're coming to worship. And I said, okay, well, that's good. He said, why are they coming? And I said, Father, I think it's because, to be honest, you do mystery, awe, and wonder really, really well. Your Orthodox tradition does mystery, awe, and wonder, and we're yearning for that. So Jesus, when he is quizzed by the scribe and he's asked, what's the greatest commandment? The scribe clearly is trying to trip up the Lord because rabbis say that there's a little over 887 different rules, different commandments, right? And so a scribe comes to the Lord and says, which one is the greatest? Pull one, Lord, out of 887. Which one is the most important? Jesus says, he quotes from Deuteronomy. He actually misquotes it. He says, the first one is this, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. Deuteronomy says you shall love God with heart, soul, and strength. Jesus Christ adds mind. I think the Lord added that just for Presbyterians. So we'll be included. We're like, oh, yes, we're in salvation. Thank you very much. Okay? I think we love reason. And I love reason. I teach at a graduate school in theology. I teach at Columbia Seminary. I love reason. You and I, we Presbyterians, those of us in the room who are, we're the second highest educated denomination in the United States. We're the second highest educated. We're the second highest educated church in the land. Do you know second to whom? Nicely done, Helen. Show off. A small little group called the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, Society of Friends. They have more degrees than we are. But they're also older than we are, so soon enough of them will die, and we will be the smartest people in all of Christendom. Part of the challenge, right? There's a correlation between educational attainment, not causal, but the more educated you are, the less, do you know this? The less children you have. And so one of the reasons why, as of 3 years ago, the Southern Baptist Convention began to decline in membership is that their educational rate is rising and their birth rate is falling. I think we love reason. I don't dismiss reason. I'm grateful for it. But I think we live in a time of mystery, awe, and wonder. I'm halfway there. From credentialed leadership to gifted leadership. So I love Far Side cartoons. This is a Far Side cartoon. The artist is Gary Larson. He stopped publishing these years ago. Gary Larson, he's from Seattle. This is the Midvale School for the Gifted. The kid's trying to get in and pushing the door, and the door says pool. I think right now in the church, we're less interested in credentials and more interested in gifts, which is not necessarily the most exciting thing for a professor at a seminary to hear, since I'm deeply invested in getting credentials to certain persons, women and men who are called to leadership in Christ Church. But I'm convinced of this. I think our congregations, I think our people, I think our young people, our children, our young adults, our older adults are more interested in gifts and not as persuaded as they used to be by credentials. This puts some of us in some tough places. So I've got a current student who finished up her year-long clinical pastoral education. I adore her. She's wonderful. She served at Grady Memorial Hospital. If you know Atlanta at all, Grady Memorial is our big downtown public hospital. Anybody who can't pay ends up having to go to Grady at some point, especially to the emergency room. She did a year of clinical pastoral education, CPE. She hadn't graduated yet, but she was listed as chaplain. I'm not going to say student chaplain, so her name tag said chaplain. And on her third day, she walked into a room, and there was a handsome, handsome older adult gentleman there holding the hand of a beautiful, beautiful older woman. She could see easily they were in their 80s. And she stepped in, and she said, "Hello, I'm the chaplain. May I spend time with you and visit with you?" And the gentleman looked up at her, and he said, "This has been my wife of 66 years. And last week, she stopped recognizing me. If you can help me understand how God is in the midst of this, and how I'm supposed to wake up in the morning after she dies and goes to heaven, when I haven't spent one night away from her in 66 years, if you can help me understand that, chaplain, then you can stay. If you can't, I prefer you just move on." And I asked her, "So what did you do?" And she said, "Well, I was trying to think of something from my Introduction to Pastoral Care class. And then I was trying to think of a verse I could say. And then I looked up and I saw my great-grandparents, whom she never met. And she said, Rodger, I just began to cry. And I was so embarrassed, and I thought, oh no, wait, you're the chaplain. You're supposed to be helping these people. And she just started crying, and she looked down, and she was embarrassed, and she glanced up, and the gentleman was crying too. And the woman was smiling at them both, and the gentleman reached out his hand, and he said, "Chaplain, I'd like you to stay." I said, "What did you do?" She says, "I sat down next to him and I held his hand and her hand, and for the next 35 minutes, we just cried." And I said, "Oh, you have the gifts for ministry." Because I would have been stupid. I would have tried a verse. I would have tried, Romans 8:28. All things work together for good for those who love God and are called to God's purpose. What a stupid thing to say. And I said, oh, you are being called to this. You have the gifts for this. I think we're less persuaded by credentials. I think we're more persuaded right now by gifts. Oh, and this really is a term. You get this, right? This is so much God's sense of humor. This is a medical term. It's called presbyopia, right? Okay? It's the ability to see very clearly what? Far away. Thank you, Anne. Anne's witnessing to us with her glasses. Thank you. But you can't see what? You can't see what's right in front of your face, okay? So why am I thinking about long-term planning to short-term planning? Tell me why. Because things are changing so fast. Information technology, transportation technology, medical technology, now, 2013, 26 years ago, we thought the only creature on the face of the earth that legitimately could make a website was a spider, okay? 6 years ago, we thought the only creature on the face of the earth that could actually tweet was a bird. And now we know differently, okay? Things are changing so fast, I think we have got to be about short-term planning. I think the Church of Jesus Christ in a Reformation period, in a rummage sale period, is being tested for how agile we're going to be. And I get long-range plans. I understand that. President Pete was talking about this morning. I told Pete the story about my father. So after Dad he's also a Presbyterian pastor, so this is evidence you can be a pastor's kid and still love the Lord. Anyway, it's possible. It just takes therapy. But anyway, so I'm not kidding. So anyway, after Dad was moderator of the Presbytery of Seattle, he served for 32 years as the pastor of the Japanese Presbyterian Church in Seattle. After he was moderator of the Presbytery of Seattle, Dad was called to chair the 10-year plan, the long-range planning committee for the Presbytery of Seattle. His job was to deliver with his committee a 10-year plan for the Presbytery of Seattle. I told Pete the story already. It took Dad's committee 7 years to pass a 10-year plan for the Presbytery of Seattle. So when it was passed, I heard about it and I called him and said, "So Dad, is this now a 3-year plan for the Presbytery of Seattle?" And Dad said, "Rodger, I don't want to talk about it." And then he said, "The problem you and I both know is as soon as we passed it, it was obsolete." He said, as soon as we passed it, because things had already moved, already had changed so fast. So the whole idea is, I think we're being called less to long-term planning, at least right now, and now we're being called 6 months out, a year out, 18 months out. What are we doing to be faithful to the Lord in the midst of all of this? From mass evangelism, that's my favorite one. From mass evangelism to one-on-one evangelism. One of my classmates from McCormick Seminary, her first call was working at the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association in the Cove, right there. And her first call was to work on the crusade staff. And 3 years after being called there, she got laid off. And so I sent her a note because I was worried about her and said, "Do you want to send me your personal information form so I can circulate it? Because you're great and you have many gifts for ministry, and I'm sure there are congregations who would love to have you calling to work with them and to follow Jesus." And she said, "Actually, I did get laid off, but the cool thing is I actually sort of got transferred from the crusade staff to the congregational evangelism staff." And I said, "Tell me more about that." And she said, "Nobody's asking for crusades anymore. Nobody's asking for those big, huge mass meetings." She said, "What people are asking for is congregations are saying, could you send a couple of your people to us over the course of a year or so and have them spend some time with us several weekends and teach our people how to talk about Jesus Christ to persons by and large whom they already know, in ways that are not coercive or manipulative or shame-based or guilt-ridden." She said, "We're exploding. We can't keep up with the requests for congregations asking for help and just teaching people how to talk about Jesus." And I thought to myself, we could do this. The problem I worry about is, what do you get when you cross a Jehovah's Witness and a Presbyterian? You get somebody who knocks on your door and has no idea what to say. Okay, that's a problem. So what I'm yearning for is an ability for you and for us to talk about Jesus Christ in ways that are not coercive, manipulative. So, I live in Atlanta, so I fly out of Hartsfield-Jackson all the time. Those of you who've been there, because you have to change planes, etc., all the concourses are connected by underground, what they call the train plane or plane train, whatever. And so I was on the ticketing area. I went downstairs and caught the train, and the doors were closing. And just at the last minute, this young man jumped on with a backpack, and I was so grateful that I said, "Good job making it." He goes, "Thanks." And he looks at the car, right? And there's this young couple that I just think is so beautiful. It just makes my heart happy. They're in the Velcro stage of their relationship still, because they can't not touch each other. So the pole is here, but they're holding each other around the pole. I just think, oh. Anyway, so he goes right up to them, and he said, I love his earnestness, and he says, "Do you know Jesus?" And I thought to myself, thanks be to God you didn't talk to me. And then she said, "Excuse me?" And he goes, "Do you know Jesus?" And then she said, Don't you even want to know our names first?" And then we were at Concourse A. This is Concourse A. And the doors opened, and they left, and thanks be to Jesus, he followed them. I'm so glad. But I thought, oh my goodness, yeah. if you're going to talk about deep and meaningful things, shouldn't you have formed a relationship with us? Shouldn't you know who I am? If this is so meaningful to you, I love his earnestness, but I'm thinking to myself, yeah, shouldn't you know who we are? Hey, do you know what these are? Can you see them? Do you know what these are? Yeah, these are called pierogies, okay? This is not my idea. This actually comes from a book from the last century by a man named John Naisbitt. He printed it in like 1989 or so, called Megatrends. John Naisbitt argues that with the rise of high technology, commensurate is going to come the rise of high touch. Okay? He said as the whole society is involved in high technology, commensurate will rise high touch. People will value things like knitted shawls and jarred foods and homemade goods and casseroles, etc. People will start valuing handwritten notes, all these kinds of things. That's what Naisbitt's arguing. So I was at one of our churches, I was preaching at the First Presbyterian Church in Poland, Ohio, privileged to preach at the ordination service of the Reverend Kristen Strobel, who's called there and is doing amazing, amazing work as pastor of the First Presbyterian Church of Poland, Ohio. I preached that morning at the regular worship service and then stayed, of course, and preached her ordination service. The presbytery cluster of churches all came together, other pastors from churches. Her parents were there, came down from Cleveland. It was lovely. I got to meet them. It was a great, great celebration. After the service, of course, this church of about 140 members, they put out this amazing spread of homemade goods, baked goods, etc., casseroles, the whole thing. And they forced me. They said, Pastor, you go first. And Kristen went first and her family. The executive presbyter was there. You go first, etc. The moderator of the presbytery. So they put us all forward. And so I'm in front. Kristen's right here. And I come up against 4 dishes of pierogies, which I'd never seen before. Okay? This is not a pierogi face. Give me a break. All right? And so I said, Kristen, what are these? And she goes, oh, they're your gyoza. They're your pot stickers. I said, okay, cool. Thanks, translation. I appreciate that. Okay? So I took one from the first plate. As soon as I did that, there was an older adult woman who, bam, was right here. And she said, what? Excuse me, Pastor, you didn't take one of mine. Mine are better than the one you just took. Mine are the third dish right here. And I said, oh, okay, thank you. So I took one of hers. As soon as I did that, having skipped the second plate, right, dish, there was one right here. She said, oh, excuse me, Pastor, I'm sorry, but you must have overlooked. Mine are the ones you skipped, and they taste better than the one you just took, okay? I ended up with 4 pierogies, okay? And I'll tell you, so there's this thick dough with different fillings, right? I'll tell you, they're sort of gut bombs. I mean, they sort of like, they sit there, they're right there, okay? But they were delicious. I'd never had them before, okay? The one I loved the most, it had sauerkraut in it, and they were delicious. They were so good. Well, so I'm leaving the church. Elder is going to drive me back to Pittsburgh Airport about an hour and a half away, which is very kind of him. So a 3-hour round trip so I can catch the last flight to Atlanta so I can teach at school the next morning at Columbia. And so he drops me off. But just before I get in the car to ride with him to Pittsburgh Airport, the woman comes out and she hands me a plate, okay, with foil over it in a plastic bag, and it's a bunch of food from the tables and a bunch of pierogies, okay? And I'm like, oh, thank you. And Kristen comes up to me afterwards and says, Rodger, you don't have to take that. And I said, Kristen, pierogies, homemade church food. I'm taking this with me. She was like, okay. So the elder drops me off at Pittsburgh Airport, and it's late at night, the last flights are heading out, and so the TSA area was like almost empty, which was great, because I was a little bit tight on my flight time. And so I got a gray bin and put all my stuff in and put this plate in there and slid it in, okay? And I went through, and I'm waiting. So my rollerboard comes out, my backpack comes out, and I'm standing there, and no gray bin with food, okay? And so I'm looking at the woman who's looking at the monitor, lovely African-American woman in her blue TSA shirt, and she's looking, and the belt goes like this, okay? Then finally she looks at me and goes, excuse me, sir, what is that? And I said, oh, it's a plate of food. I just came from a church supper at the First Presbyterian Church of Poland, Ohio. And she goes, that's a whole plate of church food? And I said, yes, ma'am. Oh, it's covered with foil. That probably is why the problem is the foil. And she goes, yeah. I'll buy it from you. And I said, no, that's my food. I'm going to eat it on the plane back to Atlanta. And she goes, okay. So it comes out. And I said, there's pierogies on there, okay? So as I say that, the guy who's standing here is this huge, big white boy, okay? Blonde, blue-eyed, big, huge guy in his big blue TSA shirt, probably Polish background, okay? He goes, did you say pierogies? And I said, yes, sir, pierogies from First Presbyterian Church, Poland, Ohio. And he goes, dude, I will double whatever she was going to pay you. And then I said, no, sir, I was going to eat that in a few moments on the flight. And then he has the nerve to say to me, well, you came from a church thing? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, didn't Jesus say something about sharing? And I said, Jesus never said to share pierogies. He's like, eh. So I take it with me. Naisbitt says, in a time of high tech, commensurate comes a rise of high. What fascinates me is 20, 30-somethings, you 20, 30-somethings in the room, as connected as you are technologically, with all of your different Facebook personalities, et cetera, and your Twitter accounts and Instagram, et cetera. The research is coming very clear. Young adults are saying two things. I feel so alone and isolated. I feel so alone, I feel so isolated. Come on, Church of Jesus Christ. We can do this. We were built for this. We were designed by the Holy Spirit to reach out to persons who feel alone and isolated and to say, you are not alone. Amen. You are not by yourself. With the rise of high tech comes the rise of high touch. So I want to show you the number 1 and number 2 most remembered commercials from the last Super Bowl earlier this year. These weren't the most popular commercials, but they're the most remembered. You know this, right? Adweek does all these surveys immediately after Super Bowl, and they ask people, which ones did you like, which ones did you not like? First commercial is for beer, second commercial is for car. These are number 1 and number 2 most remembered commercials. I want you to think about why. Number 1 and number 2 most remembered commercials from the Super Bowl. Why? High touch. Oh, come on, it's a horse commercial, Helen. Good grief. High touch, right? One more, last one. So, lest I be tribal, there was a movie from the last century that's pretty popular called The Blues Brothers. And it's about Jake and Elwood Blues and Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, and throughout the movie they have a phrase. They say, we're on a mission. Do you know it? We're on a mission. You even said it with a great, we're on a mission from God. That's right. We're on a mission from God. And so lest I be tribal, I want to translate. I'm messing with it, and I think we're participating in the Missio Dei. So that's Latin for? Mission of God. I think we are participants in God's mission. This is not my idea. This actually comes from a man named David Teedy, who is the immediate past president. Is that right? Paul, I think it is. Yeah, from Luther Seminary, right? Oh, that's right. Richard was there. So he came to us and did a faculty retreat for us. And Dr. Teedy, who's brilliant, he said the 20th century church was about discipleship. He's not dissing discipleship. He gets that. But he said the 21st century church is an apostleship church. The 20th century church, we put a lot of our effort into discipleship, which literally means that we invite people to come to us and learn what it means to be a follower of the Lord, okay? Teedy says that's fine as far as it goes. He says we are actually in an apostolic age. The 21st century is not a discipleship church, it is an apostolic church. An apostle literally is someone who is sent out. An apostle literally is someone who is sent out. Dr. Teedy, I think he's on it. He says we've got to be serious about what it means to go out, to take the gospel to all peoples all over, because people are yearning for the good news of Jesus Christ. If we think that we're going to sit there and people will come to us, then we are in an illusion. The challenge for you and for me is to move out.